Hi, welcome. This teaching is about radical self-acceptance, and we're using Tara Brach, who is she's both vulnerable. I re-listened this morning in prep for today around one of her teachings recently about radical self-acceptance. And she talks about how do we love ourselves into healing? How do we love ourselves into healing? Which, all of us on this journey of awakening more to what is self-acceptance, because it's not just, oh, gee, I accept the moment as it is, right? It's not that easy. So Tara says the self-acceptance is the path to freedom and peace, and that accepting reality as it is in this moment without judgment, and then as Kabat-Zinn adds, on purpose. So there's Audrey.
Finally.
So just right now where you're at, to begin to practice that even more by being with the moment as you hear the words kind of land and as you feel in your body. Being embodied is the roots of our wisdom. So the more often we're able to sit in the body while we're tuning into reality as it is, in this moment, in your day, listening to this teaching, we struggle with it. We might judge ourselves. We might judge the world, another person. And when something isn't right with the world, we often try and change it rather than going back to the root cause of the disturbance is me. And so when we're disturbed, anxious, stressed, upset, we can pause if we remember in the moment, and if not, we can do it later on and say, so what is happening right now inside of me? What's going on right now in my felt sense? So for me, it's often my belly's gripping and my jaws grip. So those two things in the body, when we tune into our patterns of reactivity, we can notice that it seems like it's outside and it's our reactivity internally. And so that's the first question to ask ourselves. The second is, can I be with this with kindness? So my jaws are gripping, I'm in reactivity, my stomach's starting to turn. And then the question is, if I withdraw from the external world, if I can, this can all be done as a breath as we advance, but sometimes we're swept up in it before we get there, all of us, including Tara Brach, who shares several stories about herself. So can I be with this reactivity with kindness and not be in the delusion that this is outside? That's a delusion in these teachings. But it doesn't mean a passivity or a resignation. Sometimes we can get confused with that.
What was the first thing?
What's happening right now inside?
Inside you. And what did you say about John Kabat-Zinn added something to Tara Brach's?
Yeah, so Tara Brach says the path to freedom and peace is self-acceptance, accepting reality just as it is without judgment. And then Kabat-Zinn adds, we do this on purpose. And I like that addition, right? I'm not just saying, oh, well, everything's fine just as it is. Instead, what we're saying is, I choose this moment. It's on purpose. I make a commitment to live in this moment on purpose, without judgment, accepting what is emerging. And then that idea that we just kind of passively accept it without engaging. It's a very lively, conscious awareness, awake, engaged. But as we go deeper into the body and allow that to be our guide, then that's where the roots come from when we keep turning inward around this. So allowing life to be as it is in the body and let the body tell you the truth of what's occurring comes back to a heart space of openness. So the training of moving ourselves from struggling, angry, fearful, judgmental, not open, when we catch ourselves, when we not catch ourselves, but notice So last night we had family Zoom, and my daughter is potty training her 2.5-year-old. So we had lots of conversation about pooping and peeing, and we're all learning the sign language for pooping. And my kids start asking, what was it like for us when we were learning how to do this? And I was struggling when they were that age. I wasn't very present. I was kind of whirling around, and I don't even really remember very much about what it was like for them when they were potty trained. And I could feel this kind of wave of embarrassment about saying that to them. I want to be a good enough mother. I get hooked there. So later I noticed when I was getting ready for bed shortly after that, that I had that sense of failure come over me again, not being good enough. Why couldn't I be like I am now 30 years ago when I was raising these little ones, be more present and being more, steady as a mother? And so I started to swirl down into this. I can still feel the emotions. They feel real when we're in them. And then I was able to remember within 2 or 3 minutes that this was kind of a delusion. And then I was able to come back and accept that this was happening in this moment. Tara Brach says, oh, we say hi to shame, or we say hi to the trance of not good enough. Hello, let's have tea. Brene Brown talks about that particularly around shame, as we know, Brene Brown's is how do we say hi? How do we get in relationship with what we see as our patterns of reactivity? And you can think about that, how much you want to kind of share today about where you're noticing. As I'm sharing, I really thought about what do I want to share today? And I wanted something live and to share that pattern. And I did spend 3 minutes it was painful to witness. I was in my suffering. And then how do we notice and pull ourselves back out of the reactivity and come back to this present moment? When I can accept and meet myself as I am, then I come back to the present day reality of, what is right here. But this takes a lot of training, which is why we keep coming together week after week and practice as best we can day by day, because it just doesn't happen. It's much, as we all know, much harder than it appears at first glance. Oh, I'll just accept myself as I am, no problem. But it's much more complex. So say you make a mistake, you're driving too fast, you get stopped, or you have a conflict, or you're really late for something that's important to you. You may, like I did last night, I got into kind of a freeze situation. You may get into flight or fight or freeze, and the survival brain, we've spent a lot of time on the survival brain, may hijack us into the old limbic system, the reptilian system, that all of a sudden we're on like, Arr. So how do we step away from that? Sometimes we have to go through it all the way. Sometimes we can back it up. So we enter into thinking, or feeling. So how do we pause, take a breath, and accept the reality of what's occurring in this moment? Many of us get stuck in the trance, as I did last night, of failure, not good enough. We become cut off from ourselves. And yet, this quick way of fight, flight, freeze is so beneficial. So yesterday, I was at the Lemoyne Jane's Walk thing. Jane Jacobs does that walk. And there was a child playing on the bench of a picnic, like maybe 2-year-old or 2.5-year-old. And she went to reach for something and she was going to fall. And her dad was just like, whoop. And I'm like, right, that reaction, quick, where you can save a child from falling, or someone leaps in front of your car and you slam on your brakes in enough time so you don't hit them. So you can react quickly, and that is beneficial. So we don't want to get rid of that. We can't really. But the habitual reactivity shows up inside ourselves in a number of ways, as it did in me last night. And you may be familiar with your life patterns and how you show up in that reactive way. So the other thing a lot of us do is we try and manage or control the external people or the world in a way that we don't have to feel or welcome that part of ourselves. I'm noticing I'm seeing that a lot in others right now. And I think it's coming up clearly in myself. When I see it in others, I'm beginning to have that sense of myself of how I try and manage the world, others' behaviors in particular, so that I feel good enough. So how do we notice that and then let it go, not becoming passive and resigned or withdrawing, but instead allowing it to just reveal a habitual pattern of trying to manage, which is different than I need to be engaged with myself and my self-care so I can be assertive. It doesn't mean I don't say what I need. Doesn't mean I don't have boundaries, but it does mean I'm more conscious around how I'm trying to make others behave or the world be something different than it is. And I was trying to think of an example of that. And what came up for me was the whole climate change crisis. And I don't know about you, but whenever I dive in and learn more, I experience quite a bit of anxiety and distress, because it's, even though there's people working on it, some people with a lot of science say we are doomed, this is coming. And I get quite distressed that we're not doing enough. So, for example, Canada committed to ending deforestation and changing how we're doing forestry, and they're not actually doing anything. And so yesterday at the Jane Jacobs walk here at Lemoyne, there was conversation about ecology, environmental practices. Can we keep Lemoyne Point, which for you, Pam, is this 400-acre forest at the edge of Kingston, and 80 acres of it is now up for sale because the owner died. It's not for sale yet. It's still hopefully going to the city, but there's concern. So, and I live here on the farm. So I have a personal investment. I've written about it in my columns. I really have, I can feel the come up in me, right? So how do I do everything I can? They invited me to speak yesterday and I did. I talked about some of my research a couple of years ago. So can I do that in a way that just allows it to come out without getting that edge of, we have to be different, you have to be, you know, and yet it's a subtle teaching, because how can we do that in a way? So I was able to remember yesterday to just keep coming back to my body and just allow kindness and just share that. Of course, most of the people yesterday were converted. They were coming because they walk here, right? So whenever something comes up and we feel angry or fearful or wanting to convince someone one of my things, then we can pause and say, oh, I see you trying to change others out of my fear that the world is coming to an end. And sometimes I can only tolerate parts of myself that are difficult to look at. Sometimes I can welcome it. But then we step out of being a victim of the emotions which just come on. So radical self-acceptance says we interrupt the habitual reactivity by saying, what is happening inside me right now? And can I be with this? Can I be kind to it? Or can I just let it be? Can I just allow it to be?